Hello, everybody. My name is Darren. I'm a full stack developer, and I graduated from the um, mobile web specialist nano degree. My name is Darren. I'm a full stack developer, and I graduated from the. I graduated about a month back. So I spoke with Brenda to do this webinar on progressive web apps, especially service workers. So without further ado, let's go into the details. Okay. Oops, I guess this doesn't work out as well as I thought it would. Let me reshare my screen again. Sorry about that. Okay, so today, oops, let's do this. Seems to be a lag moment. Okay, so today we're going to talk about progressive web apps, especially service workers. So first we talk about who should be concerned about service workers. I actually broke it into groups of 5. You have the front-end engineers, back-end engineers, infrastructure engineers, technical architects and designers, marketing and business sponsors. And let's see who does what. So in every project or software development project I get into, you get various stakeholders, and each stakeholder will tend to move in their own direction to fulfill their own needs. And why that is important for progressive web apps, let's look into that. So for progressive web apps, I would say that most of the development is done by front-end engineers because they were ones writing the code most of the time. And I would say you need to involve like back-end engineers and infrastructure engineers because once we go into the details later and also look at some code, you will realize that actually you might need, say, server headers to be created by either the backend engineers if you're using certain server code, or it could be done by the infrastructure engineers, depending on which web server you're using. And the backend engineers and infrastructure engineers also contributes to the entire app itself, because for progressive web apps, you got to break your web apps into different pieces. And most of the time you rely on like API calls, which will be written by backend engineers. And why do I put in like the designers, technical architects, and also the product manager and business owners? Because these teams, they usually know what are the content that your users want to see. And one of the big points of progressive web apps is like performance. And multiple channels, and so that you show the application in stages. And these the designers and the product owners, they'll be the best person to go to know about what is the most important content that the users should be seeing. So let's see. So what is the buzzword? Progressive web apps. Well, basically, you can think of it as a mixed iteration of maybe responsive web apps. It basically introduces new APIs in the browsers and to make your app reliable, fast, and engaging. And so you can have like your apps working even when the network is down or if the network is slow. And then based on the performance tuning, you'll make the user perception that your app actually loads faster than it's supposed to. So this slide basically, I'll share it after the webinar as well. It is actually obtained from Google's web development site. So it describes the various key points that makes up a progressive web app. Okay, so what is a service worker? Well, service worker is a big component, I would say, of progressive web apps. It's basically a script that your browser runs in the background, and it is separate from your web page. So you open the door to like features that would not require web page or user interaction. And they allow you to do more things like push notifications, background sync, and it might even support like geofencing and proxying in future. And then one piece of it, which is very important for progressive web app, which is it has the ability to intercept network requests, including, so it allows you to manage the caching of the responses, be it data or be it a solid object. And this diagram, which I created based on something that was previously created by a person called Kosmari, I actually had a permission to use it. So you can think of a web application as your bathroom and your servers as the water plant. So every time a user wants to take a bath, you switch on the tap and you go through the pipes to get water from the water plant. Think of it as I want to visit a website, so I key in the URL, it goes to the website. It goes through my web connection, goes to the server, and brings back the content. So what does Service Worker help you with? So for web applications, you could have like problems with the server. Server could be down because there are too many requests, or there could be issues with the code, or you could have like bad connections. Think of it as your pipe leaking. So, or you could have like multiple people trying to take a bath at the same time that will like pull down the efficiency or the responsiveness of your server. So, Service Worker, let's put in, say, a smart bath, and the smart bath allows you to request content from the server, which is the water plant, and let's put it in a water tank, which is like your cache API or IndexedDB, which is actually called origin storage. We'll go into that later. So, and then it also allows you additional features like, say, I want to heat up my water when I'm outside, so I could get a hot bath when I reach home. So this is what the Service Worker allows you to do. Next thing we're going to look at will be, where does the Service Worker actually live? And it actually lives outside the web application code within your browser. So it's a separated space by itself. And why does where even matter? So this screenshot is actually from the sources tab of your browser, of Chrome's DevTools. So if you notice what I have here, I actually have the application code on top, and you see this Service Worker scripts at the bottom. And these are actually multiple versions of Service Workers. And why I'm showing you this, I actually got into the issue debugging Service Workers because I was actually putting the debug on the wrong Service Worker when I had multiple versions. So knowing where this actually lives will actually help you when you build your Service Worker. And the other thing is, because the Service Worker lives outside your application code, so it has no ability to access the DOM, which is a very important thing. And then it could accept multiple network calls that is initiated by your application code, or through your script or references inside your HTML markup. Okay. So when is Service Worker production ready? The latest look at caniuse.com, even iOS Safari is supporting it now. So basically, service worker is everywhere. And well, iOS Safari, although it's there, but it still has bugs because it's still new to iOS. And this is actually the chart that I actually got from canIuse.com. And as for when my app is ready, I would say it's ready as of now. Because when you start writing service worker code, if you look at it, most of the time you include this check here to make sure that your browser supports the service worker. If not, it wouldn't even activate any of those code. And it's safe in the sense, depending on how you code it. And for people who are worried to try it in their production systems, I would say you could start with something as simple as like just caching a logo. So the damage is like minimal. It's just a simple image that you are caching. So why do we want to use service worker? It actually gives you the three advantages that I see over here, which is reliability over network conditions, improved experience of page loading, backup processes. I'll go into that in detail in the next slides. So reliability over any network conditions. So service worker allows you to intercept your network requests. So that gives you the ability to cache resources. So this application tab on Chrome, what you see here is I'm actually caching static resources within the cache API. And you could even cache data inside the index DB, which is actually used most of the time for data that you might query. It could be like a JSON, a key value JSON object. And what is the difference in between like using index DB and cache storage, which are both origin-based storage mechanisms? So that means only your domain could access these resources. Cache DB, most of the time, you will be caching binary data, and then because of some legacy HTTP architecture decisions where cookies are actually being sent with every web request. And then sometimes you could have CDNs that could be having your cookies, that could having your images and say scripts or whatever. And some of this need not be authenticated. And but then when HTTP1 was being built, it was made, the decision was being made to send all cookies with the request. But then when Ajax comes into play, where XHR was actually introduced, those requests don't allow cross domain access. That means, so if I have something, I can't use XHR to actually do it without the cost header being set on the server. So that was one of the reasons why Fetch API is the preferred over XHR, because Fetch actually allows you to do no cost. There's actually a flag for cost that will allow you to do these fetches without sending the cookies. But then the catch to it is you can't manipulate these resources except rendering them in the browser. So that's where Cache API comes into play, because all these binary streams, all these HTTP streams, you are not manipulating them. So you are storing them directly into cache storage so that you can cache your data in that sense. Okay, so the next thing we are looking into is improve experience of page loading. So PWAs use a PWL pattern. So PWL actually represents the 4 points that you see here. In short, what it does, it actually splits up your page loading into phases. Think of it as a progressive JPEG. So what you see is this is the initial page load, and then you might get some initial content. If you look into like how examples of how service workers are being implemented, they will actually cache the static resource of the page skeleton, and then slowly it will download data or content whenever possible. So what users see is they get quick responses, empty page, a quick blurry content, and slowly before it becomes fully interactive. So because everything is loaded in stages to a user, because they are seeing feedback, makes them feel that your web app is loading faster, even though it still takes some time to be fully interactive. Okay, so what else does Service Worker help you to do? It allows you to do background processes. Um, if you turn it on in Gmail, you'll notice that Gmail actually sends you a notification whenever you have new emails. And then Slack, if you use the web version, it does the same thing as well. And the big block of images here on top, they're actually from a blog in Trello. I got permission from the author as well to use it, which is Trello. They were demonstrating message app built using Trello. And the messages on the top was an app built without service worker. So if you go into a scenario where your app runs into a bad network condition, you'll see a 404 page. But if your app is built with service workers and PWA techniques, what you see is the user will still be able to post their message and get saved into, say, index.db. And then when the Wi-Fi turns back on, that message will then get sent to the server, which is then sent to the receiving party. So these are additional tools or additional features that you could build based on PWAs and service workers. Okay, next, let's look into how service workers are implemented. So service workers, I would break the code into two different responsibilities or functions. So the first responsibility that I place in the group is actually service worker registration. What this does is it allows you to ask the browser to register a service worker, or it captures additional events for you to, say, update your service worker. And the other group I'll put into is the service worker implementation, which is things like the fetch calls and even the notifications. So how do you actually register your service worker? So in this process, your web app actually runs code to register the file. And there are some important things that I feel is important, which is when your registration code is triggered, and then the life cycle of it, and the registration, and scope and file location. So why is the timing important? Most of the time, if you look at sample code, they'll do it on your window.load event. The reason being, usually in service worker registration, you'll tend to download a whole series of resources for statics responses and cache them into either your cache API or most likely cache API, sorry, your cache API. And these resources are actually blocking the process of your browser. So if you do it right at the start without your markup or the rest of your page being completed loaded, what you'll see here is you'll be blocking your web page, and the user will see an empty screen, which is bad. There might be scenarios where you don't use onload, then that'll be based on a case-by-case basis. Okay. The other thing why that I pointed out was service worker lifecycle, and this is important because say we have a service worker, we have an app that you access for the first time. So what's going to happen is your page is not controlled by the service worker. Then you start installing. Then you'll become active immediately. So what happens when, say, you update your service worker code and the user re-access the page again? What is going to happen then is this original version will be of the service worker will be in the active state. Then version 2 will start installing. Then you go into the waiting state. And so now you have two versions of the service worker. And that's what you saw in the, I think it was a resources tab. The sources tab, sorry. So knowing this life cycle, it actually allows you to trap the events and then prompt the user to update the service worker. Okay, and these are the registration events that you'll be looking into for updating your service worker. And the reason why it's important here is you could even trigger in your code to update your service worker to a new version upon receive programmatically. But most of the time, you will not want to do it. The reason being, your user could actually be already working on your app. So they could be like writing some content on certain pages, and they will try to post it. But then if you auto update it without the user triggering it, what's going to happen is your code is going to be overridden, and that might break your app, depending on what were they doing before. Or you may even like make them lose their content, which will make them kind of piece with your app because you wasted their time for it. Okay, so the next thing to look at will be the scope and file location. So if you look at this slide, looks like it's taking some time. Okay. So if you look at this slide, there are three commands there. The first command will register your service worker at the root folder of your application. The second command registers it at scripts in the subfolder scripts. On the scripts level as well, but it provides a scope. There's a difference in between the three. So when you register your service worker will only be able to track events or fetches that occur on the same level or below it. So the service worker on the first line, this registration code, you could basically trap or fetch events anywhere within your application. For the second version, you will only be allowed to track the fetch of anything that is from scripts or below scripts. The third version it requires a different server header to be sent as well. What it does is it allows you to still track the fetch events that are inside your root folder, although you're registering it with as script. Why was this being done? The reason was there was, when service worker specification was being written, there was a request by certain sites, something like, say, CodePen, when all their user sites are actually specified by the subfolder name of the application. So you could have like something like codepen.io, the baby dino, which is the user space. And they want to allow users to like register service workers on their user space. So the request was, instead of restricting service worker by domain, to restrict it by the subfolder. And then you have like, then when this went in, then you have like enterprise coming in to tell you that, hey, we can't change our folder structures because we need to put our scripts always inside the script subfolder. But then we still want your service worker to capture everything from the root. So to handle that, this new scope property is being introduced together with a server header called service worker allowed that needs to be set to true for it to work for everybody. And when I say about the restriction of the scope, it means, say, it doesn't mean you cannot access resources outside your scope. That means I could still issue a fetch, say, within my index controller to an external resource, say, Google Maps, and then I still could cache that resource. The restriction is based on where your fetch call is being triggered. So if I'm registering using the second line, which means I can only capture fetch from scripts and below. That means any fetch that occurs either in index controller or service worker.js, it will be captured by the service worker, but not any fetch request that is issued, say, index.html. So there's a difference in between the scope. Ooh. Okay, so I guess we talked a lot. I talk a lot, sorry. Let's see some code. Okay, so here I have some code. This will be made available on the webinar as well. It's all in GitHub. So, okay, let's do this. So this index controller file, this is where I say the service worker registration code lives in. So if you look at it, what we have here is we are basically doing the checks to make sure that whatever I need for PWAs are there before I even start registering it. And then we'll be basically looking at the status of the service worker, so that this allows you to track when a new version comes in and to prompt the user for like update to update the service worker. And I have some notification code here as well. I was trying to show a demo here, but it didn't really work that well. Let's see if I could do it again. So basically, this is what the code actually does. Let's see if this comes out. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, sorry about this. I think YouTube might not be showing it, or oh, there it is. So what I did here was earlier I was trying to play a trick where when I activated this page, I actually asked the service worker to show you a prompt, which you have seen earlier. And then, maybe let's go back to the code. So this is the place where it does the registration of the notification. And let's see what happens when I do an update to the service worker. Check that out. So if I do update, so now if I do a reload, what I see here is there's actually a user prompt to ask them to update the service worker. So that's where all these track installing and update ready code is trying to do. Basically what it does is once I find a new version of the service worker, I actually show a toast to the user to prompt them to request them to see whether they want to update to the new version. And if they click on refresh, okay, then we'll send a message that will actually trigger the update, or you'll just ignore the update. So this is dealing with service worker registration. Then the next piece of code will be your actual service worker script. I call it SW.js, but you could call it anything. And most of the time, I would think it's advisable to put like your static and dynamic cache name. The reason being, you might need it to clear data later. And for me, I always declare these static resources so that when a service worker gets installed, what I'm doing is tell cache API, open up the cache, and I want to add everything here. And notice here that that is outside the web application, so it doesn't really matter where the resource you're getting from. It only matters for the scope, scoping that I was talking about. It doesn't matter where your resource that you're getting from is. It matters where the fetch call is being triggered. And then this is the activation code. And most of the time, you will want to remove your old static data that's been cached. The reason being, depending on which browser you're on, there's a restriction on the amount of data that you could cache inside your origin storage. And IE and Safari, they offer the lowest amount of data that you can cache on. And this call here, fetch, this is where you do the hijacking. So you could ask it, say, I'm accessing the root. I could ask it to return the static cache index HTML. And this was just some fun code that I wrote. So I'll show you what it actually does. So that call was when. So what is happening there is this actually killed my server. So I was trying to show this demo, but YouTube didn't do it well, so I decided to ignore it. So what happens there is when I issued the when call, it went to the endpoint. I actually asked Express to kill my server. So that this actually demonstrates to you that service workers cache your static content. So I could still access my static pages that has been cached. But because where is not cached at all, you get a 404. And if I open up my terminal again, I could kill this over here. So that was what this piece of code was trying to do. And this is the, I did mine as online first, so that you always get the freshest content. You could do offline first as well. So what happens here is, first of all, I ask the network to go and fetch the content. And if you have bad connections and stuff, the fetch will fail, then you'll return from the cache. Depending on your use case, you could return from cache first and use some other mechanism to update to the freshest data, but that's up to implementation. And then this is the message that I sent with toast earlier. So this toast actually does a worker post message with the updated flag. So what I'm doing here is the new version will actually ask itself to skip waiting, so you take over as the controlling service worker. The push command, this is for the notification that you saw earlier. That is most of the code. I didn't put in index.db because it will make this too complicated. So this is a basic way of how the service worker code looks like. Let's see. We are done with the code. So there are things that I feel they are good to know when you start working on service workers. First thing is service workers only work from the second time because the first time you load your application is not controlled by the service worker. So I had, when I was starting on it, I was like, why is my service worker code not working? Then I realized that if you load your app for the first time, no service worker has been like registered ever. None of the service worker code will work. And the second thing to know about is when you're caching your static assets, make sure that the URL is correct. And that is, for this. And there is a code that is actually here. So if any of this points to an invalid URL, you get a cryptic error that it took me some time to get used to. And for Chrome, always use the dev tool and application tab that basically shows you tons of information. You could even play, I think, you can even send notifications through it. You could clear your service worker cache, clear your service worker, basically reset everything back to zero if you want to. So if you're working on service worker, there's a tool that you need to know, provided they don't change anything ever again. And the other thing is fetch. I mentioned it as well. Why fetch is better than XHR? Besides the fact that it is promise-based, is the way that it handles opaque requests, which is the one thing that I believe XHR doesn't do for you by default. And the next thing is opaque access will result in 7 megabyte if cost is not enabled on your server. So if you ever get into like times when your service worker your browser cache is like full, that's one thing you should check. And the next thing that you need to know about, most of the time you won't handle it because this is on the server side. Your server needs to send a max age equals to 0 for a service worker file. This is important because if not, when you update your service worker, the browser wouldn't know that there's a new version on it, and you'll keep using the old version. So this is one thing that I got for a podcast with Jake and some other people. And then the other thing to take note about will be service worker can be subjected to XSS attacks, which someone could hijack it and then put bad scripts that could like hijack your fetch or do something weird. So as part of the specifications, there's actually a new server header called clear site data, which is currently only implemented by Chrome, that will tell the browser to reset everything for the service worker and the cache if he receives it for your application. But then the other way that you could handle it is inside the code. That's where, let's see, it's coming up. Okay. So inside the code, in the activate event, where you do all these deletes, this could be the way to handle it manually. And then if you wish to learn more, these are basically the resources that I made use of most of the time. I prefer the Google version rather than Mozilla because I use ES6 most of the time, and the Google version uses ES6. Although the Mozilla one might be useful when there are scenarios where you're using the old version of JavaScript. And Jake site and Workbox. We can't use it for the nano degree, but it's good for you to know when you do it professionally. The reason being, Workbox gives you a framework, PWA, give you control over it. The reason why control is important, actually there's an issue on Create React App. Create React App put in service workers by default, and it actually causes bugs for the developers because most of the implementation is hidden by Create React App, so you don't get the control over it. But Webbox kind of forces you to do some of the installing or updating those code that you need. I haven't tried it yet, but that was what the creator of Webbox claims it is doing. So it's something that you might look into. And I believe for people working on React, Angular, Vue, CLI, they all have default. They all have codes inside their basic app to put in service workers. But after listening to someone in the field, it's like you got to go inside the code, read the comments. Apparently, they put in comments to tell you what you want to do if you want to disable like service workers. And if you don't read it carefully, you leave it to run by default. That might cause you pain down the road during that development. Okay, and yes, we are way ahead of time, but that's all for my webinar. And if you want to contact with me, my LinkedIn is there. The GitHub containing the source code that I saw is inside this presentation as well. And I do write Medium articles every now and then, and I might write this as a Medium article in the future. So if you want to track that, that might be useful as well.
Hey, Darren.
Yep.
We have a question coming from Shannon.
Okay, let's see.
She asks, are there any situations where a service worker is not recommended? For example, is it not worth implementing a service worker for a small site, like a personal site?
If it's a small site, I'll put it in. But that's personal opinion. So there's complexity in putting in service worker. But say if it's a personal site, you want to do it as a portfolio. If you implement that, and if you like say it out to a higher risk owner, that might be impressive. And then it helps because after all, your site content will be mostly static. And then I don't know the context, but for my own personal site, I usually do it using a home server or something. The connection might not be always there. So having a service worker to cache the content is a good idea. But that's personal opinion. Yeah, I'll take questions if there are any.
Does anyone have any additional questions for Darren today? Darren, I think your presentation was so thorough, nobody has any questions.
Hopefully it's useful.
Very.
Yeah, but if anybody wants to ask anything, I think LinkedIn, I do check it every now and then. So if you connect to me, just send me a message.
Here's one that just
yeah.
Oh, a few. Can you see these by chance?
Pardon?
The first question is from Anthony. And he asks, what is the best workflow to test service workers in DevTools?
Whoa. Okay. That's a tough one. Let's see. In DevTools, well, I'm a trial and error person, so I tend to debug my code. I didn't show it as part of presentations, but in your DevTools, you can go into the script and you can put a breakpoint on it, and you can see what your service worker do. So, and I would say most of the time, unless you're doing notification stuff, the registration code is pretty standard. So it shouldn't really break most of the time. But if you fall into any issues, I would say DevTools and go into the sources. I think sources, put a breakpoint on it, try to step through that. And take note that because you could have multiple versions, you might want to put it on the correct service worker file, because most of the time you name them the same name, and so that is how I usually test it. But I'm not using it in production yet, so I can't say whether there are any good ideas for that. Although I've kind of vaguely heard there are some frameworks that allow you to test your service workers. If I do find them, I might put them on the slide or somewhere where you can refer to it. Yeah.
Okay, we have another question. This one's from Math Tutor.
Mm-hmm.
He asks, where is the best place to put IDB within service worker script?
Okay, IDB, it depends on your implementation. So one difference between IDB and there are some other storage like local storage and what was it, is that IDB is asynchronous, so it supports asynchronous calls, which is very important for service workers because everything is asynchronous. And then your service worker script can actually access your IDB. So you could actually put it inside your service worker file. But for my case, when I did my nano degree, I put it inside the app file. The reason being, I kind of break my data access code into its own like classes or whatever, and it was, for my use case, it was better for me to put it inside the application code instead of the service worker file. Because that's the other thing that I like, which is keeping the service worker file smaller, so that unless you are hijacking your REST API calls inside a service worker, then you do your IndexedDB there. But when I built my app for the nano degree, I didn't hijack the IndexedDB calls. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, we have another question from Anthony who asks, do you have to clear cache first or just reload service worker on reload?
You have to clear cache first on service worker reload. Okay. So typically in code, you will not clear the cache first until the new version installs. So this so if you notice, my clearing of cache is during the activate. So the one clearing the cache is actually the new version of the service worker. So say I update this from 4 to 5, and when the user triggers the update, the service worker that does the deleting of cache is not the v4 version, it's the v5 version. The reason why that is being done is you do not want to delete your cache before the new service worker takes over. For my code, I didn't write that in, but I think in your fetch, you should be getting your cache. I did a caches match or maybe doing, say, match from this cache and this cache, because say v5 gets installed while v4 is in control. You don't want the cache to get anything from the v5 cache. You want to get it from v4 cache. But then, because v4 is in control, you can't delete your v4 cache. Just once you delete it, v4 is still in control, but then the v4 data might be deleted. So for production work, I would say it's always deleted by the new version of the service worker and not the old version. Whereas if you are testing it out and working, the trick that I always do when I find weird behavior with service workers, I go into DevTools, I delete everything. Then there's a flag called update on reload. And I always do that if I find that my new version of the service worker is not working properly. But that is for like testing rather than real production environment. Real production environment is always after the new version takes over, you delete the old version. Yeah.
All right, Darren, it looks like there's no more questions. Thank you again for hosting such an informative webinar on service workers for progressive web apps. For everybody attending, this webinar was recorded and you can rewatch it on our student webinars page. Thank you again, Darren, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody.